Of course, the last thing on Aurora's mind was dinner with her father, or Philip's. Once she was out of the fairy's earshot, she crossed her arms. I should have known that they were hiding something from me. Don't be too hard on them. It's their job to keep you safe. You try to keep me safe, she retorted, but you don't coddle me and hide terrible secrets. I'm also not a fairy, Philip replied. Though if it's that curse that we're still talking about, I could simply kiss you, he teased. Maybe that would break the spell. Aurora's face went hot. More than once she'd imagined that Philip might be her true love. She couldn't imagine anyone other than him waking her with a kiss. But they were friends. Best friends at that. He probably thought of her as a sister, someone he was obligated to marry because their fathers were best friends. She bet he even felt sorry for her. You'd have to be my true love to do that, she blurted. She instantly regretted it, but it was too late to take the words back. You're right, Philip said, after the briefest pause. He raked his hand through his hair and chuckled as if he'd made a joke. What a silly thing for me to say. Come on, Rose. Rose had been his nickname for her since they were 6 years old, and it never failed to make her smile when she heard it. Where are we going? To the garden, of course, he grinned at her, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. You haven't had an archery contest in a while. I want to see if you beating me last time was a fluke. Aurora smiled, but her heart tightened as she followed Philip to the archery range. She couldn't stop thinking about what the fairies had told her about Maleficent, about the innocuous origins of a curse that had uprooted her entire life and that of her kingdom. If Maleficent had been biding her time all these years, gathering her powers and her forces, what good was it for Aurora to sit in the castle like an archery target? Surely there was something she could do. Everything all right, Rose? Philip asked. She could find her true love, she thought immediately at the sound of his voice. You'd have to be my true love to do that, the words still ringing in her ears, and how she regretted them. I'm fine, she said, mustering a smile. Archery always clears my mind. I know. She drew her bowstring, its tension singing against her cheek. She'd loved Philip for years now, and so many times she'd wondered whether he felt anything for her. Ready? Philip said, on the count of 3. 1, 2. Her arrow hit the target perfectly. She set down her bow. You know, she said slowly, I've spent my whole life trying to avoid the curse, staying put in the castle, being shuttled away from anything sharp, even pen nibs. Maleficent knows exactly where I am and exactly how to find me. I'm tired of waiting for Maleficent to lure me into a trap or find a spindle wheel in some dark corner. You know what she couldn't expect? What? Me to break my curse before my birthday. Philip hid his reaction well, for his face remained calm. How will you do that? I'm going to seek her out and ask her to lift the curse. She's the mistress of all evil, Philip pointed out. I don't think reasoning with her is going to get her to lift the curse. Then we'll bring extra quivers of arrows, and I'll start asking the fairies to teach me some more advanced spells. I'll actually go to my lessons with Flora, too. Aurora nodded, more determined with every breath. Will you come with me to find her? Go with you to find the lair of the most dangerous person in the world? Philip chuckled. What are best friends for? Aurora grinned back at him, ignoring that skip in her heart. Let's get planning. Aurora had spent all her life learning to hide, to defend and protect herself. Now she needed to learn to go on the offensive for the next month. She and Philip worked together, spending every spare moment they could plotting out their soon-to-be encounter with Maleficent and training to sneak into her lair and past her guards. Far too soon came the morning of her 16th birthday. The castle came alive in a way Aurora had never seen before. Every maid, steward, and cook was in a frenzy was in a frenzy preparing for the celebration. A spectacular party that would begin at sundown once the curse was officially broken. There were cookies in the shapes of spinning wheels and noodles that were cut to look like spindles. No expense was spared to celebrate the end of their dear princess's curse. Even the fairies were partaking in the preparations. Flora was sewing a dress for Aurora. Fauna was overseeing the royal birthday cake, and Merryweather was helping with decorations in the grand hall. No one noticed that Aurora wasn't in her bed, sleeping peacefully. Quite the opposite. At dawn, Aurora and Philip were already on the horseback, traveling for the blot of darkness that touched upon the king and queen's kingdom, a forbidden part of the realm that no one dared enter. That was where Maleficent lived. Maleficent had a castle guarded by hundreds of monsters, each clad in iron armor and armed with an axe or spear. Aurora gulped when she saw the army. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. A raven called loudly. "They're here," rumbled the soldiers. "She's here!" At once, Maleficent's army surrounded the princess and the prince, many of them jumping with glee when they recognized who had walked into their mistress's lair. In a blast of bright green fire, Maleficent emerged. Black horns shot out from her temples, and her eyes were chilling yellow. "You come of your own accord," said Maleficent. "I'm impressed. You've made it easy for me, coming to my home. Saved me the trouble of going to yours." Aurora shivered as she clutched her bow. "I'm not here to fight you," she said. "I want to talk." The raven at Maleficent's side warbled something, and the fairy inclined her head. "Ah, how rude of me to forget." A pause. "Happy birthday, Aurora." Fire spurted from Maleficent's staff, knocking both princess and prince off Samson. The flames took on the shape of a spinning wheel, and Maleficent spoke. "You've come because you wish to spare your family the anguish of witnessing your fall. 16 years I've waited for this. It was wise of you to realize that no number of wards or protections your fairies cast will keep you from me." "You won't hurt her," Philip said, stepping in front of Aurora. "How quaint. The princess brings her knight in shining armor," Maleficent laughed. "But you see, I, too, am prepared." Maleficent raised her staff, and Aurora's breath left her as its fiery light illuminated thousands of spindles floating above her. "Each spindle has been enchanted to bring eternal sleep to anyone it pricks," said Maleficent as the spindles glimmered green. "Shall I send them over to your kingdom now? Perhaps we can start with the good king and queen, or right here with your dear prince." "No!" Aurora cried. The mistress of evil gave a chilling smile. "As I thought. Will you come forward?" Aurora glanced at Philip, who mouthed a hard no. But they were surrounded by both soldiers and enchanted spindles. What could Aurora do? She stepped forward. "Why curse me over a party invitation?" she demanded. "At least tell me that." The light from Maleficent's staff shook as she laughed. "Do you think it was over a party? Do you know what your name means, child?" "Of course she did. The rising sun." "Yes, gold of sunshine in your hair," Maleficent said, twisting a lock of Aurora's hair with the end of her staff. "Lips that shame the red, red rose. You are a bearer of light, and all light is a threat to the kingdom of darkness I was born to rule. That is why you must die." A shiver twisted down Aurora's spine. "You don't have to do this. The fairies told me that your magic is unique, but you don't have to hurt anyone, Maleficent. At least of all yourself." Laughing wickedly, Maleficent raised her staff. What makes you think I don't enjoy this? Suddenly she began to transform. Her black gown stretched and wings grew from her sleeves. The ground trembled and the dark skies rioted with a great coming storm. Aurora and Philip backed away fearfully, and Samson dipped his head, urging the two to mount him so they could get away from there. But it was too late. Maleficent's laugh transformed into the roar of a dragon. The princess, prince, and stallion raced across Maleficent's kingdom, and Samson reared as the drawbridge crumbled under the weight of Maleficent's falling tail. At the last moment, he leapt across the gap, his hind legs barely landing the jump, a feat that did not please the dragon. Spiked vines burst from the ground, blocking their path. "We can't get any further," Aurora cried, leaping off Samson and drawing her sword. Nothing had trained them for this. Together, the prince and princess began slicing at the vines, but as they cleared a path for themselves toward Maleficent, sharp points began to protrude from the branches. "Rose!" Philip cried. "There's thorns!" "Oh," Aurora saw. And they weren't just any thorns. They were the spindles that Maleficent had enchanted, all of them, attached to the vines. Fear churned in her gut. If one of them touched her... "That's right," Maleficent hissed. "One touch, and you'll be mine." Philip dismounted their horse and charged at Maleficent, throwing his sword into her belly. But a new vine burst from the side and pricked him in the back. "Philip!" Aurora cried as the prince fell forward. She rushed to him. He was asleep, as she would be. "Did you think your prince would be able to kiss you awake?" Maleficent laughed. "Each thorn is cursed with the sleeping spell. With your true love asleep, no one will be able to wake you now. There will be no true love's kiss." Aurora clenched her jaw. "Come on, Samson. It's you and me now." Fire spewed from Maleficent's jaws, and Aurora used the magic she learned to enchant Philip's shield, holding it up the last minute before the flames burned her into ashes. The vines moved like arms, swinging relentlessly at Aurora. She leapt out of the way, at every turn casting defensive magic she had learned from the three fairies, changing blasts of fire into flowers, changing the spikes that flew her into bubbles. She was growing tired. There was no chance she'd ever make it to Maleficent. No chance she could get a clear shot at the fairy. A familiar voice cried out, "Hurry!" Flora and Fauna and Merryweather, they had come. "This was very rash of you, Aurora," greeted Flora with a frown. "We'll talk about this later. Right now, do you remember your spells?" Yes, Aurora did. She'd been casting them to deal with the bursts of fire and to evade the thorn vines that swung at her back every other second. She leapt to avoid another vine, but this time Merryweather turned the vine into a silk ribbon. With a whirl of her wand, Fauna confronted a blast of fire and turned it into a jet of rainbows. The fairies' interference enraged Maleficent. While the fairies distracted Maleficent with their magic and protected Aurora from the vines, Aurora reached behind her back from her arrows. She had only 3 left. "Arrows of virtue," Aurora cast upon her bow. "Fly true!" Aurora aimed at Maleficent's heart, then released her arrow. True indeed it flew, straight for the dragon's chest. But no sooner did the arrow fly to Maleficent's heart than the dragon caught it and waved it aside. Aurora readied another arrow. The same thing happened. Maleficent evaded the attack. This wasn't working. Only 1 arrow left. Aurora bit down on her cheek. "Is that all you have?" Maleficent screeched, laughing as she blew more fire into Aurora's path. The heat was almost unbearable, and Aurora staggered back behind Philip's shield. Then she had an idea. She reached for her last arrow and aimed for one of the spindles behind Maleficent. The dragon was so used to flicking away Aurora's attacks that she didn't bother looking. And that was her error. Maleficent's wing brushed against the enchanted spindle, and she let out a screech as she realized what she'd done. In one last attempt, her tail came swinging at Aurora. The princess leapt out of the way, diving into the arms of her protector fairies as Maleficent collapsed, falling into the canyon beneath her castle as an eternal sleep claimed her. The three fairies surrounded Aurora and the unconscious Philip, pointing their wands at the sky to protect one another from the falling boulders and rubble. Then, when the earth went still, the fairies dared step apart. "It's done," Flora breathed. "Maleficent is no more. The curse is lifted." So it was. The spindles on the vines no longer glowed green with Maleficent's magic, and the ghoulish soldiers of her army transformed into men, groaning awake, as if they'd been looking under a terrible spell. "Look!" cried Fauna. The darkness!" The night that cloaked the land surrounding Maleficent's domain receded. For the first time in what might have been centuries, sunlight burst from behind the clouds, banishing the shadows that wreathed the mistress of evil's castle. Aurora knelt beside Philip. The ground was still warm from the fire, but the vines were gone, vanished as if they'd never existed. She swept Philip's bangs from his brow, hoping beyond hope that she was his true love, because she couldn't bear the thought of him staying asleep forever, of losing him, and she knew with clarity he was hers. "Wake up, Philip," she whispered in his ear. "Who's going to fence with me and tell silly jokes every time I take down your guard? Who's going to dance with me in the garden when the roses bloom, or sneak into town with me to play with Mrs. Val's children? Who's going to talk to me when I'm lonely and make me believe that true love is real?" She swallowed hard. Here it was, the moment she dreaded for 16 years. But instead of being cursed herself into an eternal sleep, it was Philip. Philip, her best friend, her confidant, her favorite best friend in the world. Her favorite person in the world. She knew the way to break his curse. But what if it wasn't her? What if she kissed him and nothing happened? "Only one way to find out, Aurora," she told herself. Slowly, she pressed her hand against his chest and leaned forward. She thought she ought to close her eyes, but she couldn't. She was too nervous. Then she thought about all the time she'd waited to see him, and how he'd made life at the castle so much more bearable. She thought about how much she loved him. With a smile, she pressed her lips against his. They'd held hands plenty of times, even hugged, but this was their first kiss. His lips were cold at first, then warmth sprang to them, and he was breathing. Tears pricked the edges of Aurora's eyes, and she cried out in joy. "Philip," she said, hugging him, "you're awake!" He tried to jump to his feet, but Aurora didn't let go of him. "Maleficent's gone." Philip smiled back. "Funny. In my dreams, it was always me kissing you. I thought you meant it as a joke." "Never." Philip touched her cheek. "I was only worried you'd be disappointed." "Never," Aurora echoed. "I wanted it to be you." Philip glanced behind him, hearing the thundering gallops of what sounded like hundreds of horses. "Sounds like your parents sent the entire army out to look for you." So they had. As soon as Aurora helped Philip to his feet, an entire legion of royal soldiers appeared behind them. "Your Highnesses," they cried. "Maleficent is sleeping," Aurora announced, gesturing at the dragon slumbering below the broken drawbridge. Maleficent had fallen deep into the canyon below, but the dragon's belly rose with breath. She was still alive. Only true love's kiss shall awaken her. The princess, prince, and fairies looked upon the dragon solemnly, knowing that whatever love Maleficent might once have had in her heart had been twisted by the path she'd chosen, full of resentment and rage. The three fairies flew over the sleeping Maleficent. Flowers and trees grew over the dragon, covering her sleeping form so she was forgotten. And the last of the darkness that had cloaked Maleficent's castle turned to light. Day had returned to this part of the land, and Aurora remembered Maleficent's words. Light had once won against the darkness, and Philip had been her true love all along, just as she'd known he was. Philip gazed at her tenderly, as if he could read her mind. She took his hand. I hear there's a party at the castle, and the guest of honor's late. Shall we sneak inside and steal some cake? He grinned at her. That's the best idea I've heard all day. Race you! Together they ran after Samson, back for the castle, to begin their happily ever after. I hope you enjoyed The Rose and the Thorns of A Twisted Tale Anthology. Join me next time on our next reading. See you real soon.